Hey, everybody. I wanted to come talk about something, and this is going to be a little bit longer because it'll be a little bit more expansive, but I think it's important. And it's about this narrative that's been going around about uh, the Insurrection Act and the idea of martial law. And a lot of people seem very afraid that Trump is going to call the Insurrection Act into effect, that he is going to try and institute martial law. And while I understand why people are afraid of that, and I don't think it's a completely and totally unfounded fear, I do think that it is not really necessary at this point. And the reason for that is basically that they don't need to do that. Everything everything that that people are afraid they might do, or that they think, everything that people are talking about them being able to accomplish by calling the Insurrection Act into effect, they can already do. And we know that from very recent history. We also know that from, the last 30 years or so of history, and back even further than that. But even if we just stick to, say, the last 30 years, we can see that they don't actually need to call martial law to achieve what they want to achieve. What people are saying would be the point of calling martial law. And I want you to think now, consider the fact that Black Lives Matter was, for all the information we have, Black Lives Matter was the largest protest movement the country's ever seen. And they didn't need the Insurrection Act to put that down, right? They didn't need the Insurrection Act to be able to violently suppress that movement. They didn't need that for Occupy. You can go back to the 90s, the battle in Seattle, right? It was the same thing. It's the same model. You can go to the RNC protests in the 90s and see the same thing. And so this idea that they need to call into effect the Insurrection Act in order to be able to achieve that is just doesn't have it doesn't have any foundation, because they can already do that. Everything that they would want, that people are afraid of them doing, they can already do. They know they can already do it because they've been doing it. And what I'm kind of getting at here is that I think Black Lives Matter was a wake-up call for a lot of people in the country, right? Maybe Occupy to a different degree, were wake-up calls to a lot of people in the country, because they were seeing what was being said and broadcast on the news, and then going to social media or the internet and seeing something very different, right? You were seeing, this is what your anchor and your reporter is saying on the news, and then going to the internet or social media and seeing the people on the ground who were broadcasting from the place where this was actually happening, and you were able to see that these were two completely different stories, right? The news was not accurately depicting the situation. And I think a lot of people have not really thought much about the narratives, the way that they internalize narratives about other protests from before, right? From the past. And so it seems to you all, to a lot of people who this was a kind of such a new wake-up call for, that this is new, that like what happened to Black Lives Matter was new, or what happened to Occupy was new. And it's not. And so that understanding that what you were seeing on the news and what was happening on the ground were two very different things, like you need to think about the fact that that has been happening for 70 years at least, right? Much longer than that in truth. But, at least the last 70 years with broadcast news being able to do live coverage and that kind of thing. It's been that has been happening all of that time, right? We've never really been getting completely accurate depictions of what's happening on the ground because for a lot of different reasons, but one of the central reasons is that they are always the first narrative that they will go to and the first narrative that they will put out will be the narrative of authority, right? So you have a protest that's happening, and if you don't have people who are capable of, so you go back to the 90s, you go back to the 80s, the 70s, the 60s, if you don't have people who are capable of broadcasting that contra narrative to what the news is saying, then what the first narrative that you're going to be seeing every single time is the narrative of the police departments. It's the narrative of the local politicians. It's the narrative of the national politicians. And you have now seen what that gap is between the on the ground reality and what's being reported. And that has existed that entire time. So this idea that they need to institute the Insurrection Act to achieve those goals that people think that they will use it to achieve doesn't make sense. And they don't need the Insurrection Act. They don't need martial law for that. Okay? So that's number one. Number two, this is a very large country geographically. Like there's a lot of space. Number one. Number two in this part of of what I'm saying anyway. So the second, so it's a very big country. It's very hard to cover that ground and to be able to control all of that space, right? We're also 300 and some odd million people, right? Like around 330 million people. It is almost impossible to control 330 million people through force, okay? Almost impossible. And so they cannot afford, right? One of the things that we saw like recently, right? ICE was in LA and Chicago simultaneously. And they started to try and also conduct operations in New York at the same time. Now, New York, and I saw somebody else made a comment on social media about the ways that the different cultures of these different cities are reacting to ICE and this federal incursion into their cities. So you had Portland that was in the inflatable costumes and all of that, and Minnesota has been reacting differently than that, right? And then you had New York, right? So ICE was conducting operations in LA and Chicago simultaneously, like major operations. And then they tried to start going into New York, but because of the kind of particular culture of New York, that did not work. Right? They got overwhelmed very quickly. They were getting chased out of neighborhoods like immediately. So they were not able to, they were spread too thin, right? They had too many people in LA and Chicago to also be able to conduct those same kind of operations in New York. So you saw a major ramp down. I'm not saying they're not still operating in New York, but they weren't able to conduct that kind of major focused operation in the same way because of that response. And so you have to take that into consideration when you start thinking about them talking about like martial law. They can't actually control 330 million people by force. They're just never going to be able to do it. So part of the thing to think about here is how else do they achieve that same goal, right? How else do they achieve the goal that would be achieved by instituting martial law? One of the ways they do that is create the fear of martial law, right? So if people are too afraid to show, to make any public demonstration of their opposition because they're afraid that it's going to encourage martial law, it achieves the same effect, okay? And I don't think it is a coincidence that suddenly there was an uptick in the amount of people talking about Insurrection Act and martial law, that Trump then tweeted that he was going to call in the Insurrection Act. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think those things are actually related, because I think they are always going to try and manipulate the fear and confusion to their advantage. It does not make sense strategically, tactically, for them to call in martial law, because they can't afford to be seen not being able to control the country if they do that, okay? One of the reasons that they have been doing this the way that they have been doing it and doing these major operations in targeted locations is because it makes them look stronger, right? You think about, what are they putting out on their social media? What are they? What is Fox News focusing on? And what that is they are using those to make the appeal to their sense of power. They're using those to make them look strong, right? And because in these targeted operations, they have the force to do that, okay? They don't need the Insurrection Act. They don't need to call martial law, because as we have already now seen, yes, if the unrest rises to a certain point, the local police will get involved and they will shut down whatever protest, whatever unrest, whatever opposition has already come to bear, right? And so this idea that, and you know, we've seen it now from politicians too, right? So there's been Tim Walz, and he's out there saying, don't take the bait. And Jacob Frey in Minneapolis, don't take the bait. There's no bait to be taken. It's not there. And that way of thinking, right? That way of approaching this achieves their goal for them already. So, you know, I've made some other videos that have talked about like being able to expand our political imaginations, being able to ask new questions, being able to look at things differently. And this is one of those things. And I think for a lot of people, especially, you know, white people, this is all very kind of new. Like, holy crap, they shot Renee Good in the face. And yeah, I mean, it's terrible and it's terrifying. And it is a sign of escalation that they are willing to attack a white woman who was so clearly murdered the way that they are. But it's an escalation. Like they already have the infrastructure in place to be able to do the things that you think, or a lot of people seem to think, they need in order to achieve what you think they will try to achieve using martial law. And that just fundamentally is untrue. It just doesn't make sense. And I get why people feel that way. I understand why you're afraid, but we need to start working around the fear itself making those decisions for us, because we're past that. We're past that. That it's over. That was a different, that the thing that you're talking to, the thing that Tim Walz is talking to, the thing that Jacob Frey is talking to, that's over. That country's gone. So we need to think about how much you're letting fear dictate your decisions, how much you're letting the fear dictate the way that you're talking about this, because that is it's going to serve them. And if we're not presenting an accurate depiction, an accurate assessment of what the situation actually is, then we can't make good decisions. And if you can't make good decisions, they're going to keep kicking our asses. That's basically the long and short of it. And so I just wanted to come and talk about that, because I understand it is a very frightening thing. This is all terrifying, right? But we need to be able to look at it accurately, and part of looking at it accurately is understanding that a lot of that narrative that many of us internalized through the years was always inaccurate. It was never really a complete and accurate depiction of what was happening. And that's a very hard thing to come to terms with. I understand, but we have to come to terms with it in order to be able to make good decisions going forward, especially if we're going to act in solidarity, right? Because the other part of this, oh no, they're going to institute martial law, that is like, there's I hate to say it this way, but that's a white people thing. It really is, because this is, if you look at what's happening to immigrants, and like let's not lie to ourselves here. The people, the immigrants that they're targeting are people of color, right? They're not going after just your average, white dude from Eastern Europe. You know what I mean? Like that's not what's happening. So this, like, the way that we're talking about martial law is also kind of communicating the idea to people that, like, well, it's okay if these people have to live with this reality. It's not okay if we have to live with that reality. And that is how we got here. They were able to set up this kind of infrastructure that they're using now, and able to set up the kind of narrative responses that they're leaning back on now, because that was all allowed to happen for so long, right? And so, like, we need to take that into account. We need to take what we've learned and see what that means for the rest of the way that we have thought about history and our political culture and all of those things. So, this talk about martial law is counterproductive, basically, because it's making us afraid of a thing that's already there.